Have you ever felt the weight of a sentence that doesn't just hurt, but tries to define who you are? I felt that on the day I heard the words that changed everything in my life, and before I go on, I want you to write in the comments where you're listening from, your city, your state, your country. This matters because this story has no borders. It belongs to so many of us, scattered around the world, united by the same silent pain that travels through entire generations. I remember the exact moment it happened. There was no argument, no yelling, no shoving, no chaos. There was only one sentence. A sentence so short it barely took up space in the air, yet opened up way too much space inside me. It was like time froze, like even my breath hesitated. The words came out dry, cold, sharp as a blade. You're just a black woman. That didn't need an echo, because the pain was already built into the intention. I stayed silent, not because I agreed, not because I accepted it, but because my body froze. It's strange how pain sometimes doesn't show up the way we expect. It didn't come as anger. It didn't come as a scream. It came like an impact that knocked the ground from under me, like I'd been hit by something invisible. And in that moment, I didn't just hear that voice. I heard old voices, voices I didn't even know I still carried. That sentence didn't hit only the woman I am today. It pierced every version of me. The little girl who learned too early to shrink herself to fit. The teenager who tried to disappear to avoid being targeted. The grown woman who believed she had already risen above the judgmental looks. I closed my eyes so the tear wouldn't fall. It was the survival reflex I learned over a lifetime. Women like me can't fall apart in front of people who try to diminish us. Those who wound us that way usually want exactly that, to see our reaction, to see us stumble, to see our pain displayed as weakness. And I refused to give that show. My silence, in that moment, was my shield. A cracked shield, yes, but still a shield. The worst part of that sentence wasn't the sound. It was everything behind it. The historical weight, the contempt disguised as a simple statement, the racism dressed up as an opinion, the attempt to reduce everything I am, my whole story, all my achievements, all my scars, all my battles, into 3 tiny words. 3 words that revealed far more about the person who said them than about me. But in that moment, the pain didn't come with logic. It came raw. It came ancient. It came deep. It felt like something had been ripped out from inside me. And maybe you'll understand what I'm about to say. There are pains that aren't new. There are pains that get awakened, shaken awake, as if they'd always been there, hidden, waiting for the world to slip up so they could rise again. And when they rise, they never come alone. They drag memories, moments, situations we thought we had overcome, but had only been sleeping. The voice sentence, "You're just a black woman," brought all of that back. That constant feeling of being evaluated, measured, judged. That feeling of having to prove your worth all the time, even after you've already proven more than enough. That old sensation of being seen as less, even when you carry more strength than anyone could imagine. I stood there, staring at the face that threw those words at me like someone tossing trash on the ground. And for a second, I wondered if it was worth responding. But I realized that any answer in that moment would have been unfair to myself. I was too wounded to react with clarity. And there's something no one ever says out loud, but I will say it here. When a wound is deep, you don't react. You try to survive the impact. And I survived. I swallowed the pain, straightened my back, pressed my fingers into my palms so they wouldn't shake, and I stayed quiet, not out of submission, but out of self-preservation. It's strange how pain opens doors we locked years ago. In that instant, I wasn't just in that room anymore. I was inside my own memory. It was like every version of me was standing in a line, looking at me, asking, "How long will you let them try to shrink you?" And I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew that moment would divide my life. I knew something had to change. Something was already changing. And that sentence wouldn't end the story. It would start another. But in that first moment, all I had was pain. A silent, heavy, ancestral pain. A pain that didn't begin there. A pain with roots. And it's exactly about those roots that I'll speak in the next part, because nothing I felt came from nowhere. None of that wound is recent. It is the result of everything that came before. And it's in the depths of my own story that this narrative continues. The wound has opened, but it hasn't finished speaking. From the moment my knees weakened under the sentence that tried to reduce me, I felt something old stirring inside me. It wasn't just the pain of that day. It was like every piece of my history was being pulled back to the surface without my permission. It wasn't only about what I heard. It was about everything I had carried without ever saying. It was about every moment when I tried to believe the world was changing, even knowing change always arrives late for women like me. And when that wound opened, I was forced to look inside myself, into the places where I stored pains that were never mine alone. Pains passed down from the women who came before me. Pains from a past I inherited before I even knew who I was. As I breathed, trying to steady the tremor in my hands, I found myself returning to my childhood, as if walking through a quiet hallway inside my own memory. I was small, barely understanding what the world could do to a black woman, but already sensing the weight my mother carried on her shoulders. I remember her sitting at the sewing machine, always focused, always steady, always exhausted. It was as if she carried the whole world in her body and still found the strength to teach me dignity. She told me to walk with my head held high, but she didn't say it like someone giving advice. She said it like someone pleading, like someone who knew exactly what the world does to girls like me, like someone who had seen too much, felt too much, fought battles she never asked to fight. I grew up with the sound of that machine, that steady rhythm that felt like a silent prayer. With each stitch, my mother sewed more than fabric. She sewed her survival and mine. She sewed the strength I would one day need to face everything she always knew was coming. And even when I tried not to notice, I knew she was also sewing pain. Pain she had nowhere to put. Pain she carried with clenched teeth. It wasn't a pain that broke. It was a pain that shaped. And it was that same pain that began rising inside me the day someone tried to reduce me to that sentence. I also remember my grandmother's gaze, so strong it seemed to cut through any darkness. She didn't speak much, but her presence said everything. When she looked at me, it was as if she were seeing herself many years ago, a girl with bright eyes, surrounded by a world that would try to dim that light in every possible way. She held my hands firmly and said, "Girl, learn not to shrink yourself." I didn't understand it then. I was so young, so distracted, so innocent, that I barely realized her words were a warning, a protection, and a prophecy all at once. My grandmother knew what happened when the world realized a black woman carried too much strength. She knew that the brighter the light in someone like me, the more people try to snuff it out. And as these memories flashed through me like a movie running too fast, I realized that sentence didn't hurt me only in that moment. It found old cracks. It found the little girl who tried to fit in. It found the teenager who learned to swallow racist comments disguised as jokes. It found the young woman who believed straightening her hair would make people treat her with more respect. It found the part of me that stayed quiet, not because she wanted to, but because she had to survive. I found myself remembering the first moments when I realized the world would never look at me with neutrality. The times I walked into places where no one said a word, yet everyone stared at me as if I didn't belong there. The times teachers pretended not to see my effort. The times classmates laughed at my skin, my hair, my voice. The times when all I wanted was to exist without having to justify my own existence. These weren't random memories. They were pieces of a puzzle I never asked to put together, but that still lived inside me. And the cruelest part was realizing how many times I tried to convince myself that things had changed, that time had healed me, that I had already overcome everything. But when I heard, "You're just a black woman," I understood that pain that's been buried never truly disappears. It only sleeps. And it wakes when it smells injustice. It wakes when it tastes contempt. It wakes when it realizes that no matter what we do, prejudice somehow still finds a way to slip through the cracks of our lives. I felt the presence of my entire lineage that day. I felt my mother, my grandmother, my foremothers. I felt their stories pulsing through me like an ancient drum. And for the first time in years, I understood that my pain wasn't an individual pain. It was inherited, a pain passed down from generation to generation because for so many women like me, existing has always been an act of resistance. I felt the weight of everything I have lived, but also the weight of what they lived, and that shifted the direction of that pain inside me. I realized it wasn't just about the sentence itself. It was about everything that came before it. It was about centuries of devaluing, about memories I never lived yet still shaped me. It was about the constant attempt to shrink women who carry more strength than the world is willing to admit. It was about the times I had to be strong when all I wanted was rest. It was about the moments I had to smile while bleeding on the inside. It was about every version of myself that sat in silence so the world wouldn't feel uncomfortable. And in the middle of that avalanche of memories, I felt something break open. Not a break that destroys, but a break that reveals. Because when I revisited my roots, I didn't find only pain. I found strength. Strength that didn't begin with me, but reached me through other women. Strength from those who faced the world with their heads held high when the world pushed them down. Strength from those who never gave up, even when giving up would have been easier. Strength from those who turned suffering into wisdom. Strength that now ran through my blood. And because of that, I want you to write a specific sentence in the comments. I am the continuation of the women who came before me. Write it because, just like me, you didn't start from zero. None of us did. We come from a story, from a struggle, from a force that wasn't born yesterday. As I returned from those memories, I understood that the pain I felt that day wasn't just a wound. It was a mirror that made me look at everything I carried, everything I endured, everything they tried to do to me. And when that mirror opened in front of me, I realized I was not the diminished woman someone tried to describe. I was the result of everything I survived. I was the strength my foremothers stitched into me. I was the voice so many women never got to have. I was the continuation of a story the world tried to silence, but never succeeded. And it's from exactly that point that the next part of my story begins, because after revisiting my roots, I realized that the pain wasn't there to break me. It was there to reveal me, and what came after that awakening changed everything inside me. When I revisited the roots of my pain and realized that sentence hadn't come from nowhere, something inside me began to light up behind the wound. It was the clarity that always shows up after the impact, that uncomfortable light that forces us to finally see what has been right in front of us the whole time, even though we chose to ignore it. And it was in that clarity that I had to face a truth I had avoided for years. The man who hurt me with those words was the same man I loved, supported and defended for so long without noticing that, little by little, he was draining who I was. It's strange to admit this, but the truth is that destruction rarely arrives all at once. It comes in crumbs, in tiny cuts, in little comments that seem harmless in the moment, but slowly erode your self-esteem without you realizing it. It comes in silences that hurt more than any shout. It comes in subtle comparisons, in criticisms disguised as concern, in looks that make you feel small even when you're trying your hardest to stand tall. And now, looking back, I know I began to weaken long before I noticed I was losing strength. When we first started seeing each other, he seemed like someone who genuinely recognized my worth, and maybe that was exactly what kept me there. The idea of finally finding someone who didn't look at me through the reduced lens so many others used. He complimented me, told me I was strong, that I was smart, that I was unlike any woman he had ever met. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, because after a lifetime of carrying wounds, it's easy to confuse attention with love, and easy to confuse validation with respect. But with time, without noticing, I started seeing little cracks, small details, almost invisible, things anyone could have ignored. He said he was just joking when he made comments about my appearance. He said I was too sensitive when a joke that wasn't funny hurt me. He said I misinterpreted things when he subtly devalued me, like someone picking up an object and saying it was never that valuable in the first place. He said I overreacted when I pointed out attitudes that wounded me. And little by little, I began doubting my own perception. He was skilled at making it seem like I was the problem, that I reacted too much, that I saw offense where there was none, that I turned nothing into a storm. And like so many women who learned to survive in silence, I swallowed it. I pretended it was nothing. I convinced myself it was just a bad day, just a careless word, just an unimportant moment. But those small things kept building something bigger inside me, the silent weakening of my confidence. I remember once spending hours getting ready for a dinner. I was happy, light, and he looked at me and said, "You're going with that hair?" He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't harsh, it was just the tone, just the way he stretched the word, that, as if my natural hair was something that needed to be fixed, hidden, altered. I smiled, pretending it didn't hurt, but I changed. I got ready again. I tied my hair back. I obeyed, without realizing it. And that's how we weaken ourselves, when we start changing not because we want to, but because we're afraid of disappointing someone. Other times, he insisted on controlling my choices in ways so subtle they felt like care. He said I worked too much, but complained when I rested. He said I deserved recognition, but criticized me when I received praise. He said he loved me, but got bothered when I loved myself too. It was always the same pattern. A compliment before the blow, a sweet gesture before the indifference, affection right before the comment that tore everything down. And I, without realizing, began dimming my own light to fit inside his shadow. I started talking less so I wouldn't bother him. I started questioning my own decisions. I started apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I started believing I needed him to be validated. I started losing pieces of myself one by one, like someone removing parts of a house without realizing it's collapsing. And the worst part, I thought that was love. Because when you grow up used to being strong all the time, anything that feels like company begins to look like refuge. When you're taught from a young age to endure, you end up enduring too much. And when you grow up believing you have to prove you're worthy, you start accepting crumbs as if they were full meals. Today, I know he never loved me for who I was. He loved me for how easy I was to manipulate. He loved me because it was convenient to have someone who cared, who supported, who understood, who always gave more than necessary. He loved me as long as I stayed small enough not to threaten his insecurity. But the moment I grew, the moment I shined a little brighter, the moment I loved myself a little more, he revealed what he truly felt. Because no one humiliates what they consider equal. No one tries to shrink what they respect. The sentence he spoke that day wasn't a slip. It wasn't a mistake. It was the truth, hiding behind years of emotional manipulation. He simply said out loud what he had always tried to make me feel in silence. And I want you to write this in the comments if you're still here with me. I do not accept microaggressions disguised as love. Write that not just for me, but for yourself. Because weakening doesn't start with a big blow. It starts with details. It starts when you let something slide once, and then again, until one day you look at yourself and no longer recognize the woman you've become. I lost myself, and I didn't even notice when it happened. I shaped myself so much, bent so much, silenced myself so much, that when he threw that cruel sentence at me, it landed in a place inside me that was already fragile. He knew exactly where to aim. He knew exactly which wound to touch. He knew I was vulnerable, because he was the one who helped make me that way. And that is the kind of truth that hurts more than any word. It's the truth that tears you open, the truth that exposes you, the truth that reveals that before I was wounded by someone else, I had already been hurting myself trying to protect a relationship that was killing me slowly. And it's from that realization that the next part of my story begins. Because after understanding how he weakened me, the next step wasn't revenge. It wasn't running away. It wasn't silence. It was something much deeper. It was the recognition of the moment when everything shifted. And that's exactly where this story continues. I never forgot the setting of that day. It's strange how certain moments carve themselves into your skin like tattoos made without ink, but deep enough to stay forever. I remember the color of the walls, a dull beige, almost sad, as if even the room absorbed the pain of everyone who passed through it. I remember the light coming through the window, a cold light that doesn't warm, it only exposes what's hidden. I even remember the smell, a mix of old coffee and dust settling in the cracks. It's unbelievable how the body records every detail when something hits you that brutally. He was leaning against the table, arms crossed, as if he were about to discuss something ordinary, something trivial. But it wasn't trivial. His voice was never loud, and maybe that's what hurt me most. He said those words with the kind of calm only someone completely comfortable in, their own cruelty, can have. There was no hesitation, no weight in his tone. It was as if he were talking about the weather, about traffic, about anything unimportant. But he was talking about me, about my existence, about who I am. You're just a black woman. When he said that, the air seemed to stop. There was no echo, no dramatic sound. The impact was internal, silent but devastating, as if something had burst inside me. And I know many people imagine that, faced with an attack like that, the reaction would be screaming, confronting, exploding. But that's not what happened. What came was silence, a silence so deep it felt like an abyss opening inside my soul, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for peace, but announces war. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw what had always been there, but what I refused to accept. His eyes held no doubt, no regret, no empathy. It was the look of someone who had finally taken off the mask, a look that said, "Now you're seeing who I've always been." I tried to find something familiar in that face, some memory of the man I thought I loved, some shadow of the partner I believed I had chosen. But there was nothing. He stood before me like a stranger, a dangerous stranger, a stranger who knew every vulnerability I had, every fear, every insecurity, and chose to strike exactly where it would hurt most. I felt a wave of heat rise through my body, but it wasn't shame, it was anger, a silent, ancient, fierce anger, an anger I didn't remember ever feeling before. And it was that anger that kept me standing. Because in that instant, while the world felt too small for the size of the pain inside me, anger was the thing that kept me from collapsing. I remained quiet, but inside, something entirely new was being born. I had always heard that silence is a dangerous space because it's where the unsaid words live. But in that moment, silence was my territory. It was my protection. It was the place where I could breathe without giving him the satisfaction of watching me break. And maybe you'll understand what I'm about to say. Some sentences don't hurt just because they're spoken. They hurt because the person saying them knows exactly what they're trying to trigger. He knew. He knew that sentence carried centuries of violence. He knew it came with the weight of every story I had already lived. He knew he was touching a wound that didn't belong only to me, but to every black woman before me. He knew, and he used it as a weapon. And still, I didn't move. I didn't lash out. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at him, looked long and steady, looked with a firmness I didn't know I had. And in that gaze, something changed inside him. He realized he hadn't broken me. Because contrary to what he expected, the wound he opened didn't destroy me. It awakened me. What was meant to silence me ignited something inside. It was as if I finally understood that once pain is recognized, it is no longer weakness. It becomes fuel, and I felt that fuel burning slowly, feeding a strength I had never allowed myself to reach. I felt my hands trembling, but it wasn't fear. It was containment. It was as if my whole body was fighting not to overflow all at once. I took a deep breath, slow, heavy, weighted with everything I had been holding for years. And in that instant, I discovered that silence has a power most people underestimate, because in that silence, I could hear myself. I could hear something that had always been inside me, but that his emotional manipulation had muted for so long. My own inner voice saying, "Enough." In the middle of that moment, I remember thinking that if I opened my mouth, no tears would come, only truth, only everything he had tried to crush for years. But I stayed quiet. Quiet because I understood that this wasn't the moment to speak. It was the moment to feel, the moment to see clearly, the moment to finally accept that I was not standing in front of a confused or regretful man, but in front of someone who had always believed he had the right to belittle me. I felt a chill in my stomach, but it wasn't fear of him. It was anticipation of what would come after. It was the sense that his sentence wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something far greater inside me. Something that was being born from that very silence. The quiet rage that rises from an injustice so deep that the body needs a few seconds to adjust to the size of the truth revealed a strength I had never allowed myself to grow. And that's why I want you to write in the comments, if you're still with me, My silence is also strength. Write that because, just like me, maybe you've been wounded at a moment when you couldn't react. Maybe you've swallowed words that deserved to be spoken. Maybe you've heard things that tore your soul open. And yet, you stayed standing. The silence people often mistake for weakness is actually the pause you need before everything turns. I stood there, motionless, looking at the man who used my love to weaken me, and in that instant, I realized he no longer knew who he was dealing with. The woman who stayed silent in that moment was not the same woman he tried to mold for years. There was something different in my eyes, something steady, something resolved, something that said that sentence would not be the end of my story. It would be the breaking point. He tried to maintain that proud stare, but I saw the moment his certainty began to crack. He didn't find submission in me anymore. He didn't find doubt. He didn't find that woman who apologized for everything. He found someone who finally remembered who she was. And the irony is that it was his sentence that made me see it. The same sentence that was supposed to destroy me was the one that lit me up. And it was in that heavy silence, in that space between pain and awakening, that something aligned inside me. Something that prepared the path for what would come next. Because after that moment, after that internal rupture, after that sentence that tried to tear me apart, I began to see the whole truth. And that truth, painful, uncomfortable, unavoidable, is what begins the next part of my story. The part where silence becomes action. The part where I finally begin to see myself with the clarity he always feared. Because what is born from that silence is something that changes everything. After that heavy silence, after that stare that cut through me like a final attempt to keep me tied to who I no longer was, came the days I will never forget. They were long, heavy days, the kind that drag as if time itself had lost direction. I woke up with his sentence slicing me from the inside, as if it were written on the back of my eyelids, and every time I closed my eyes, there it was again. You're just a black woman. It was as if the echo of those words had soaked into the air of the house, as if every wall had absorbed the violence, as if nothing had been spared. And I, who had always been so good at moving forward, found myself standing still for the first time, suspended between what I felt and what I needed to understand. In the first days, I cried. I cried with suffocated anger, cried with the sadness built over years, cried for everything I had accepted in silence, thinking I was doing the right thing. I cried not only for what I heard, but for everything it awakened inside me. It was as if that wound had found other hidden wounds, and all of them decided to bleed at once. But what surprised me most was that my tears weren't only pain, they were release. Every tear felt like a weight leaving my body. A weight I carried without realizing it. A weight that was never mine, but that someone placed on me, as if I were obligated to bear it. I spent days wandering through the house with no direction, touching objects, as if they could give me answers. I sat on the couch, stared into nothing, trying to understand how I had allowed his voice to stay louder than mine for so long. And the more I thought, the more I realized that sentence said nothing about me. It said everything about his ignorance, the ignorance that comes from fear, from a wounded ego, from the desperate need to shrink someone else so you don't have to face your own mediocrity. He didn't say it to describe me. He said it to hurt me. And as cruel as that was, it revealed something I had never noticed. He tried to make me small because he knew my worth was too big to fit inside his limitations. And as that awareness opened inside me, the pain began to transform. It didn't disappear, it didn't soften, it didn't vanish like dust. It reorganized itself. It was as if my soul was gathering the broken pieces and arranging them in a new pattern, a pattern I had never seen before. I started to realize that everything he tried to erase, my strength, my light, my ancestry, my brilliance, was coming back stronger, coming back clearer, coming back as if reminding me of who I truly was. I spent hours talking to myself, replaying moments, reconstructing memories, and that's when spiritual justice began to reveal itself. The kind of justice that doesn't come from revenge, doesn't come from retaliation, doesn't come from striking back. It comes from clarity, from understanding, from the light that fills your chest when you finally see the whole truth. And the truth was simple. What he said did not define me. It never had. I was the one who, out of fear of losing what I thought was love, allowed small violences to accumulate inside me. And when the last one came, it shattered, not because it was bigger than the others, but because there was no space left to hold anything. Slowly, I started to realize that the thing that hurt me so deeply also opened a door I would have never dared to open on my own, a door that made me revisit everything I was before him, and everything I could be after. And that's when I started praying, truly praying, not the automatic prayers we whisper to ease guilt. It was a deep prayer, without memorized lines, without formality. I would kneel, breathe deeply, and say, "Show me what I'm not seeing." And I felt that little by little, something answered. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a clear sign. It was a perception. It was as if God, my ancestors, my intuition, all intertwined, were placing an invisible hand on my back, saying, "Do not accept what does not belong to you." And I understood. I understood that those words, which felt so personal, had nothing to do with me. They were about him, about his smallness, about his own shadows. They were about everything he feared I would one day realize, that he didn't deserve the woman I was. And that clarity brought others with it, like the memory of all the times I dimmed my voice so he wouldn't feel threatened, all the times I stopped celebrating my victories because he couldn't handle my light, all the times I chose silence to avoid conflicts he himself created, all the times I accepted emotional crumbs because I believed love was supposed to be this, suffering, excessive patience, self-erasure. But what I learned in those days is that love does not destroy, love does not corrode, love does not dismantle you. Anything that hurts that deeply is not love. It's emotional dependence dressed up as affection. It's fear disguised as comfort. It's darkness, pretending to be company. And as that truth settled in my chest, I realized clarity was taking over me in a way I had never felt before. It was as if the pain had cleaned my vision, as if I were finally seeing the world with my own eyes and not through the distortion he placed over me. I understood I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I understood I didn't need to shrink to be loved. I understood I didn't have to accept humiliation to have companionship. I understood that his sentence only held power as long as I believed it, and I didn't believe it anymore. And that's why I want you to write in the comments the phrase that marked this turning point for me. Clarity is healing too. Because so often we think healing comes from reconciliation, from apologies, from a final embrace. But healing truly begins when truth appears, when we realize that what looked like an ending is actually a revelation. In the days that followed, I began to rise differently, not physically, internally. My body was tired, but my soul was awake. I felt a strange calm, not of absolute peace, but of certainty. Certainty that the pain had shown me what I needed to free myself from. And the more I reflected, the more I realized that relationship had been, for a long time, an emotional prison I kept open myself. He never had to lock anything. I stayed because I believed I needed him. But when that sentence shattered inside me, everything that held me there became meaningless. And the spiritual justice came in that deep understanding. He didn't take anything from me. He only revealed what I wasn't ready to see. He showed with cruelty what life had been trying to warn me about in subtle ways for a long time. And when that truth finally hit, the pain didn't disappear, but it did move. It stopped being a wound and started becoming evidence. Evidence that I survived. Evidence that I woke up. Evidence that I needed that impact to see the whole truth. And it's from that clarity that the next part of my story is born. The moment when I decided to act, not out of revenge, but out of justice for myself. I was never the kind of woman who needs to raise her voice to be heard. And after everything I lived through, after the clarity that pain brought me, I understood that my revenge would never come from shouting, exploding, or creating a scene. My revenge would not be loud. It would be silent, moral, spiritual, the kind that doesn't need to be announced to be felt. Because when a woman like me wakes up, when she finally sees who she is, who she has always been, and who tried to erase her, there is no force in the world strong enough to stop her. And I woke up. In the days that followed my turning point, I didn't do anything that could be seen on the outside. I didn't throw anything away, didn't break anything, didn't argue. I didn't enter the shallow fight he expected. I just began reorganizing myself from within. And it was that reorganization, slow, quiet, steady, that became the greatest revenge of all. Because nothing disturbs a man addicted to control more than watching the woman he tried to weaken reclaim her life. The first step was emotional. I stopped waiting for messages that were never sent with sincerity. I stopped interpreting silence as concern. I stopped justifying my existence. I stopped asking permission to be myself. I gathered my emotions the way someone gathers scattered jewels, carefully, reverently, with the certainty that they were worth far more than he ever admitted. And as I picked up those pieces of myself, something inside him began to crumble, because someone who depends on your weakness doesn't know what to do when you start growing again. Then came the financial reconstruction. I began organizing my finances with the calm of someone who knows that taking control of your life also means taking control of your money. I made silent adjustments, small cuts, small savings, small strategies, nothing that drew attention, nothing that started fights, but each action was like pulling one of his roots out of my soil. I noticed details I once ignored. I reclaimed things I had given up. I stood where I once shrank. And I shocked myself when I realized how much of my effort, time, and stability I had given away, receiving nothing in return except emotional exhaustion. And that's when I realized, when a woman begins taking care of her own money, she takes back her power. He noticed it before I admitted it to myself. He sensed that the emotional and financial dependency he tried to maintain was dissolving. And for the first time, he was the one who grew restless. He was the one sending longer messages. He was the one asking where I was. He was the one realizing that his arrogant certainty vanished the moment I stopped revolving around him. But of all the reconstructions, the most powerful was the spiritual one. That's the one that truly changed everything. Because when I sat alone, in silence, on a night, when it felt like the entire world was asleep, I felt a presence that gave me a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the peace of no pain. It was the peace of understanding. The certainty that I was being guided, seen, protected. The certainty that nothing I lived through was in vain. The certainty that God's justice, the kind that doesn't need an audience, was already happening. I began praying with more intention. I started thanking God for what I was learning, even when it hurt. I began asking for wisdom, not revenge, for clarity, not retaliation. And the stronger I grew inside, the more I noticed my energy shifting. I walked differently, spoke differently, slept differently. Even my breath felt different. And a woman cannot be reborn in silence without shaking the entire world of the one who tried to control her. He felt it. He noticed it. He began to see that I no longer reacted to his provocations, that I no longer explained myself, that I no longer shrank, that I no longer justified anything, that I no longer sought his approval. And that was the first time I saw fear in his eyes, fear of losing control, fear of realizing I was no longer accessible to emotional manipulation. Real fear, the fear of a man who knows he will never again find another woman like me. And I want you to write in the comments, "When I rise, nothing can break me." This sentence isn't just a trigger of strength, it's a reminder, the kind of affirmation that builds community, connection, and belonging among women who survived relationships that corrode, silence, and diminish. As the days passed, my moral revenge took shape. I began reclaiming control of the house. I started moving my things with intention. I started occupying spaces I used to leave empty so he wouldn't feel threatened. I began caring for my appearance in a way that had nothing to do with pleasing him. It was about looking in the mirror and recognizing myself. I walked through the house with a different rhythm, a different posture, a different energy, and all of that without raising my voice, without accusing, without pointing fingers. My transformation was silent, but deafening to someone who had something to lose. And he had a lot to lose. Because losing a strong woman is easy, but losing a strong woman, he thought he had managed to break. That is something that eats a man from the inside out, and he was unraveling. I saw it in the quick glances, the uneasy sighs, the way he tried. To start conversations he used to dismiss, the discomfort that showed up every time I said no with firmness, and especially in the fear he felt that I could live without him, because deep down, he always knew I could. My revenge was never about making him suffer. My revenge was freeing myself. And nothing hurts more than watching the freedom of someone you tried to imprison. Nothing crushes an emotional manipulator more than realizing the chains he put on someone didn't fall because he loosened them, but because I broke them myself. And it was in the height of that silent reconstruction that something happened, something small, yet powerful, something that shifted the entire direction of my story and will open the next part of this journey with a strength you won't expect. I had already understood that my moral revenge wouldn't be loud, it would be felt. And while I rebuilt my world in silence, something unexpected began happening on the other side. He, who once walked around the house with the arrogance of someone who believes he'll never be challenged, began watching me as if trying to guess what was happening inside me. It was almost ironic. When I tried to talk, he didn't listen. When I tried to explain, he didn't understand. But the moment I withdrew, rebuilt myself, and rose on my own, he finally started paying attention. His discomfort began small. A lost stare, a pointless comment, a hesitant attempt to start a conversation about things he once ignored. I could see by the way he watched me that he missed the control he used to have. He noticed when I stopped blaming myself for everything. He noticed when I stopped expecting anything from him. He noticed when I began sleeping better, getting ready for myself, breathing without fear. And the truth is, he never knew how to handle my strength. But realizing I was taking that strength back without asking permission was the blow he never expected. And that's how it happened. Slowly, almost like a predictable script, he began changing his tone. First came the exaggerated kindness, then the random compliments, the kind he never offered when I was begging to be seen. Then came the sudden attempts at conversation, as if he had decided, out of nowhere, to take an interest in me. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. Because when a woman wakes up, she sees intentions before words. She notices the movement before the gesture. She feels the weight before the sentence is even spoken. And then, one day, he finally did what I knew would eventually happen, though I didn't know when. He stood in front of me with that look full of late regret. Not real regret. It was the kind of regret that's born from fear of losing the source, not from awareness of wrongdoing. The regret of someone used to coming and going as they please. The regret of someone who finds the door closed for the first time and panics because he always believed it would stay open. He said my name with a sweetness I had never heard from him before. A manufactured sweetness, fragile, the kind any experienced woman recognizes instantly. He tried to touch my arm, but I didn't allow it. He tried to come closer with that theatrical softness meant to look vulnerable, but I didn't feel a thing. Absolutely nothing. The woman I used to be would have melted at that speech. The woman he molded with manipulation would have believed him. But the woman I became after the pain, she was no longer impressed by empty words. He started talking about missing me, about loneliness, about hard nights, about how much he had messed up. He said he didn't want to lose us, didn't want to lose our story. But every sentence sounded like a desperate attempt to hold on to something he never valued. I listened in silence, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted him to feel the difference. I wanted him to understand that this time, I was the one steering the direction. And when he finally took a deep breath, eyes glistening as if he were deeply emotional, and said he was ready to change, ready to come back, ready to start over, I felt something inside me that I had never felt before. It wasn't doubt, it wasn't sadness, it wasn't guilt, it was freedom. Clean, full, mature freedom. A freedom that didn't need to be shouted. All it needed was to exist, so I said it. Calmly, without anger, without trembling, without tears. No. The word came out so soft it felt light, yet carried the weight of everything I had lived. It was the kind of no that leaves no space for interpretation, no gap for negotiation, no room for excuses. A no that closes chapters. A no that heals wounds. A no he never expected to hear, because men like him never believe they've truly lost a woman they tried to destroy. They assume they'll always have access to return, forgiveness, a second chance. But with me, no, not anymore. He froze as if someone had struck him. His face changed. The fake sweetness dissolved in seconds. The arrogance, the superiority, the confidence evaporated. And that's when I understood what was truly happening. He didn't expect a no. He wasn't prepared for my strength. He had no idea what to do when he realized he no longer had power over me. And I'll admit, in that moment, I witnessed spiritual justice unfold right before my eyes. It wasn't revenge. It was alignment. It was balance. It was life handing him the same emptiness he once tried to place inside me. He wasn't losing a fragile woman. He was losing a woman who had been reborn, and reborn far away from him. I kept watching as he tried to process my decision. I saw the confusion, the wounded pride, the desperation hiding behind questions I didn't answer. I saw his fragility for the first time, and that's when it finally hit me. He was never strong. He only looked strong next to my fragility. But once I reclaimed what was mine, once I stood tall, once my light returned, his weakness became undeniable. He wasn't prepared to face the woman I always was, but whom he tried to bury. And I want you to write in the comments, if you're feeling this strength now, I choose myself. Write it not for me, but for you. To remember that sometimes the most powerful decision is the one no one expects, the one no one understands, the one no one can make for you. He tried to argue, tried to say I was being extreme, tried to trigger guilt, tried to pull up memories, tried to remind me of promises I was the only one who kept. But none of it touched me. Because when a woman wakes up, she no longer negotiates with what hurt her. She doesn't return to the place that almost destroyed her. And above all, she doesn't hand someone the chance to repeat what once wounded her. I took a deep breath, stepped back, and watched something I never imagined I'd see. He retreated, not physically, emotionally. His eyes shifted into an expression I knew very well, the look of someone who has lost, someone who realizes they ruined the only thing that mattered, someone who understands, far too late, that they'll never find again what they threw away. And in that instant, that exact instant, I knew the story wasn't over. My answer wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of something far greater. From here, everything changes. After the day he begged and I said no, something inside me changed for good. It wasn't a sudden shift, not an impulse, not an explosion. It was a blooming, a slow, steady, almost sacred blooming, as if every part of my soul, once scattered, were returning to its rightful place. I woke up different, walked different, breathed different. It felt like I was rediscovering a woman who had always existed but had been buried beneath layers of pain, fear, emotional manipulation, and silent exhaustion. And as those layers began to fall away, what appeared underneath wasn't fragility, it was strength. In the first days of my healing, I noticed the silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It was mine. For the first time in so long, I could hear my own thoughts without confrontation, without judgment, without someone trying to shape who I should be. I could talk to God without interruption. I could look at myself in the mirror without feeling watched by eyes that wanted to shrink me. I could exist without apologizing. And that freedom, that clean air, that peace settling inside me, was the greatest proof I had made the right decision. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel the morning before the world opened its eyes. I breathed in the smell of coffee, the breeze coming through the window, the light touching my face in a way that felt like an ancient blessing. And in those small rituals, I began rebuilding myself. I began understanding that healing isn't something we receive. It's something we build day by day with small acts of self-love. And that self-love, which once felt distant, difficult, abstract, began taking shape. I began cooking for myself with care, as if feeding someone I loved deeply. And for the first time, that someone was me. I began turning my home into a temple, a place of protection, renewal, and spirituality. I opened the windows, let the light in, let the air move, let the past leave. And as I did that, a feeling of rebirth began filling my chest. Not a gentle rebirth, a powerful one, the kind that comes after a storm you thought would never end. One of the most important parts of my healing was understanding that I had always had value, always. The problem was that I was surrounded by people who were afraid of that value. People who only know love through possession. People who only feel big when they shrink someone else. People who only feel safe when they're in control. And the moment I began leaving those people behind, it felt like removing stones from my soul. I felt lighter every day, freer every morning, more whole with every step. I started writing little notes to myself, sticking them on the fridge, on the mirror, on the bedroom door. Notes like, I am enough. My worth depends on no one. I choose myself every day. And I want you to write this phrase in the comments right now. I choose myself because I am worthy. Write it to anchor inside you the same strength that began to rise inside me. With that new energy, I began strengthening my spirituality. I talked to God like someone speaking to a close friend. I spoke to my ancestors like someone honoring a legacy. I'd say, help me stay steady. Help me see what I still can't. Help me not return to what hurt me. And I felt a silent, steady response. It was as if something was guiding every step, as if an invisible hand rested on my shoulder, reminding me that I wasn't alone, that I had never been alone. I carried with me the strength of the women who came before me, and that awareness transformed me. I began to feel proud of myself, real pride, pure pride, pride that didn't depend on compliments, recognition, or approval. Pride for surviving, pride for waking up, pride for saying no, pride for choosing myself. I realized that self-love didn't begin in that moment. It was reborn. It returned after being suffocated. It returned through my hands. It returned because I decided I deserved nothing less than love, respect, dignity, and peace. And the more I blossomed, the more I understood that healing wasn't about him, wasn't about what he did, wasn't about what he said. Healing was about me, about my identity, my ancestry, my spirituality, my inner strength. It was about reclaiming the woman I became despite the pain, not because of it. It was about understanding that I had always carried light, but I was surrounded by shadows that didn't belong to me. And when those shadows were removed, my light shone in a way even I didn't expect. I went back to doing things I loved. I went back to listening to music that moved me. I went back to caring for my body with tenderness. I went back to dancing around the house the way I did when I was younger, when I wasn't afraid, when I still believed in love as something beautiful. I smiled again without holding back. I spoke to myself with kindness. I looked at myself with care. I recognized myself again. And the more I recognized myself, the more I understood that what I lived through needed to be told, not as a story of pain, but as a story of healing, a story that could reach other women, a story that could serve as a testimony of faith, strength, and emotional resilience. I understood that there is power in sharing what once hurt us, not to relive the pain, but to turn it into wisdom. It was in this process that I realized healing is not linear. There are days of strength and days of exhaustion, days of certainty and days of doubt. But even on the difficult days, I knew I wasn't going backwards. I was climbing with steady steps, climbing with scars that no longer embarrassed me, climbing with the conviction that I deserved a life filled with beauty, peace, and truth. And as I climbed, I felt an ancestral force taking shape inside me, the force of the healer, the force of the spiritual warrior, a force that doesn't need to raise its voice to be felt, a force that heals, protects, guides, and illuminates. That force prepared me for the next chapter of my life, a chapter that didn't come from the past, but from the future. Because when a woman truly heals, something new begins to approach, something she never imagined she deserved, something that will transform how she sees love, the world, and herself. When I completed that path within myself, when I looked at everything I had endured and recognized each step as part of the woman I am today, something very deep revealed itself. It wasn't an immediate answer, nor a dramatic epiphany. It felt more like a whisper rising from within my soul, an ancient, steady whisper, carrying a truth that had always been with me, even when I didn't know how to listen. A truth born from ancestry, dignity, and the spiritual strength that runs in my blood long before I ever existed. I was never just a woman. I was never just a survivor. I was never just what they tried to convince me I was. I have always been more, always been vastness, always been story, always been legacy. And in that understanding, the words rose inside me, clear as morning light. I was never just a black woman. I am 1,000 women before me. I am my grandmother's courage, who walked steady even when the world tried to push her down. I am my mother's hope, who stitched dignity into my days even when she had no rest for herself. I am the strength of my ancestral women, who faced storms I will never know by name, but whose inherited scars made me capable of enduring what I lived. I am shaped by battles I never saw, but that carved my path. I am shaped by ancient prayers, by stories whispered bedside, by silences filled with wisdom, by tears that watered the earth so I could bloom today. And when I say I am 1,000 women before me, it's not poetry, it's spiritual truth, because I carry in my body marks that aren't mine, but that teach me resilience. I carry in my chest a faith built not only by me, but by generations who clung to God so they wouldn't lose hope. I carry in my steps the steadiness of someone who knows she never walks alone, even when the path is hard. I carry in my choices the responsibility of honoring those who never had the freedom to choose. So today, when I look at my story, I feel no shame, no weakness, no loss. I feel pride. I feel power. I feel truth. I feel that every pain guided me to the whole woman I am now. And this wholeness doesn't depend on anyone else. It doesn't depend on outside validation, approval, or love. It was born here, inside me, in the place where light and shadow meet to create something the world cannot extinguish. And that is the awareness I leave with you now, that you, too, are made of stories, of roots, of memories, of strength, that you, too, carry within your chest the women who came before, women who lived so that you could exist, that you, too, carry energy of healing, wisdom, and rebirth. And regardless of what they tried to make you believe, you are far more than any word used against you. You are life, inheritance, victory. And before you leave this video, I want you to write in the comments the phrase that honors everything that brought us here. I am 1,000 women before me. Let that declaration stay. Let other women read it. Let other women see themselves in it. Let other women feel inspired. This is the heart of our community. Now, if you want to keep diving into this universe of strength, healing, and matriarchal wisdom, there's another video appearing on your screen. It brings a completely different story, but with the same powerful energy we share here. Click to watch and come feel another truth that may also speak directly to your soul. Because when we recognize ourselves, we never walk alone.